Imagine standing at the edge of the world. The wind cuts like a knife, the horizon is endless white, and the silence is broken only by the growl of the wolves, moving somewhere beyond the snowdrifts. This is no place for weakness. Here, in the Arctic, survival is not a matter of strength alone. It is a pact, a bond, and at times, a sacrifice that would leave outsiders stunned. For among the Inuit, in the frozen world of ice and shadow, hospitality could mean far more than food and shelter. It could mean giving away something so personal, so sacred, that early missionaries who stumbled upon the tradition were left in speechless horror. The Arctic was not built for human life. Winter reigned year round, and the sun itself could vanish for months, plunging entire settlements into a blackness so complete it seemed eternal. Crops would never grow here. The sea froze solid, animals vanished into the distance, and every bite of food had to be torn from the ice with cunning, patience, and skill. Seals, walruses, whales, these were not prizes but lifelines. A single missed hunt could mean starvation. A broken tool could mean death. In this world, no one could afford to be selfish. A family alone would not survive. A family bound by alliances, by trust, and sometimes by a shared intimacy just might. To outsiders, the idea sounded unthinkable. Yet to the Inuit, when a guest entered your home, he was not simply a visitor. He became part of the household, welcomed fully, cared for as one of their own. And in some cases, this welcome extended to the most intimate bond of all, the host's wife. It was a tradition that horrified missionaries and explorers. But to the Inuit, it was not scandal, not shame, but trust. Trust that in a land where death lingered at every doorstep, one could depend not only on a man's strength, but on the very fabric of his family. This practice, often called a wife sharing, was far from reckless indulgence. It followed unspoken rules. Consent was vital, reciprocity was expected, and it was temporary, lasting only as long as the guest remained. In some regions, it formed part of sacred friendship pacts that linked families together, ensuring protection and survival should tragedy strike. Imagine a hunter lost to the sea ice, swallowed by the abyss beneath the snow. His family, alone, would face starvation. But if bonds had been made, if wives had been shared, then another family would step forward, bound by obligation, to see them through the storm. It was not lust, it was survival. But missionaries did not see survival. They saw sin. They called the people immoral, accused them of weakness and depravity, and set about erasing what they did not understand. Yet behind their condemnation lay an unsettling truth. In the Arctic, life itself demanded choices that civilization could barely comprehend. Choices where even intimacy became a tool against death. The homes of the Inuit were worlds of their own, whether a dome of snow stacked against the sky or a sod house buried into the earth. They were not places of privacy. Families lived shoulder to shoulder, 3 generations huddled beneath one roof, every breath of air thick with the smell of burning seal oil, damp furs, and the closeness of human life. The walls were thin, sound carried easily, and space was scarce. Intimacy was not hidden behind closed doors and candlelight. It was whispered in silence, concealed behind a turned shoulder, or shielded by a thin curtain of caribou hide. In such a world, privacy was a luxury that could not exist, and survival depended on the unspoken agreement that respect meant looking away, even when you could hear everything. When a guest was offered more than food or shelter, it was rarely said aloud in blunt words. Sometimes it was a gesture, a quiet nod, a moment when the guest was invited to lie beside the wife in the flickering glow of a seal oil lamp. When the wind howled against the walls, a pact might be sealed without a word. And when the morning came, life resumed as though nothing had changed. No shame, no whispers, only the understanding that hospitality had been given in its purest and most dangerous form. This tradition, so alien to outsiders, began to wither when missionaries arrived. Their words were sharp as blades, branding the old ways as indecent, their laws crushing customs that had endured for centuries. Slowly, with the coming of wooden houses, modern technology, and a world that sought to bury the past, the old ways faded. But within the memories of elders, they remain, whispered like ghost stories, reminders of a time when survival was tied to bonds far deeper than food or shelter. And here, my friend, is where I must pause, for the story you've just heard is only the surface, the frost on the edge of the ice. Beneath it lies something even more haunting, a world where marriage was not about romance, where intimacy itself was carved by the demands of death and survival, and where the very birth of a child could decide the fate of an entire family. What you're about to hear next will chill you to the bone. Subscribe before we descend deeper into this forgotten world, because what follows is darker still, and you won't want to look away. Marriage in traditional Inuit society was never a story of flowers, vows, and soft music. It was a pact, forged in the crucible of a world that demanded strength above sentiment. Elders often arranged unions not for love, but for survival. A young girl might be promised to an older, skilled hunter for his spear, and experience meant security against hunger and cold. A man could take multiple wives if he had the strength and resources to provide for them, his household swelling into a fortress of survival against the endless night. Sometimes, though rarely, a woman might have more than one husband, binding families together in unshakable trust. These marriages were not indulgences, they were lifelines, strands in a web of survival that spanned across icy plains. Courtship itself could be stark, even unsettling. In some cases, a man proved his worth not with gifts or poetry, but with skill at hunting, with the strength of the tools he crafted, or by stealing away his intended bride in symbolic acts of abduction. Other times, nighttime visits during communal gatherings allowed potential couples to whisper in the dark, forging a bond amid the murmurs of an ever watchful community. Nothing about intimacy was private. Nothing about marriage was simple. It was practical, calculated, and utterly necessary. Yet, even in this world, tenderness lived in small gestures. A husband repairing his wife's boots before a hunt, a wife preparing a meal from scarce meat and dividing the choicest piece for her partner. Survival was built on such quiet acts of devotion. But devotion in the Arctic was not what outsiders would call romantic. It was something harder, deeper, forged in suffering and endurance. Childbirth, too, carried its own shadows. To bring life into the Arctic was to gamble with death. Women bore children in cramped shelters, sometimes in homes carved of snow, other times in small temporary huts built just for that purpose. The air inside was thick and hot, the silence broken by the crackle of seal oil flames and the labored breathing of women in pain. Midwives, often older women of the community, guided the birth with knowledge passed down through generations. Yet, despite their skill, many mothers and infants did not survive. Caribou furs swaddled the newborns that did, and breastfeeding often continued for years, not just as nourishment, but as the only shield against starvation in a world where milk, grain, and warm kitchens were nothing but dreams. Each birth was both a miracle and a warning. Life here came with a price, and it was never guaranteed. Inside the igloos and sod houses, intimacy was an open secret. Families of 3 generations pressed together in a single room, the air heavy with breath and heat. Sleeping platforms were shared spaces, serving as bed, table, and workspace all at once. Lovers turned their backs to the room, shielded only by a hanging skin or a snow partition. They learned to move in silence, to whisper in breaths, too low to wake a child or an elder. Sound carried. Privacy was an illusion. But to survive, people ignored what they heard and respected what they knew. This was a world where intimacy was not sacred, not hidden. It was simply part of life, woven into the fabric of survival. And yet, in the midst of this stark practicality, there were moments of beauty. Imagine a night when the aurora flamed green and violet across the black sky, when the wind outside screamed like the voices of lost souls. Inside a tiny home of snow, a man and his wife huddled beneath firs, their bodies pressed close, not only in passion, but in desperate need of warmth. Each breath fogged the air between them, each heartbeat a reminder that in a land bent on killing them, they were still alive. Love, in its own way, thrived in the frost. But it was a love born from fire against ice, never fragile, never soft. The arrival of missionaries, traders, and modern law shattered this balance. Suddenly, centuries of custom were labeled sins. Wife sharing was condemned, polygamy outlawed. Even childbirth practices were dismissed as primitive and replaced by Western medicine. The igloo gave way to wooden houses, the dog sled to snowmobiles. And with each change, the memory of the old ways faded further into shadow. Yet the echoes remain. Ask an elder, and you may still hear the stories, not told with shame, but with the heavy silence of remembrance. Because for the Inuit, these customs were never about decadence or scandal. They were about survival, about saying, in a land where everything could be taken in a moment, I trust you with my life and with the one I love most. Today, modern Inuit women are leaders, teachers, business owners, and politicians. Their voices carry power in places where once only whispers could survive. The igloo is no longer home, but memory, and yet beneath the roar of snowmobiles and the hum of electric heaters, the past lingers like frost on the edge of glass, the memory of a time when survival bound people in ways that outsiders could not and still cannot understand. So remember this: what missionaries called sin was, in truth, a covenant against death. What outsiders dismissed as shame was a bond forged in a darkness few of us will ever endure. These traditions remind us that survival can twist the meaning of love, reshape the nature of intimacy, and demand sacrifices we might recoil from in the safety of our modern homes. And perhaps the most haunting truth of all is this: in the land of endless ice, nothing was private, nothing was certain, and nothing was truly one's own. Even love itself could be shared. The past is never silent. It waits beneath the snow, whispering its secrets, daring us to ask the question we'd rather not face. If you were born into a world where survival demanded everything, what would you be willing to share? If this story has unsettled you, if it's forced you to imagine choices beyond comfort or morality, share your thoughts in the comments below. Because sometimes the darkest history is not in what people did, but in what they had to do to stay alive.